Hello, our favorite humans. Welcome to Bronx Tales with your host, Sleepy Bronxy, and me. I'm Logan. Thank you for being here. So, Brian Entin has a new channel on YouTube. It's called Brian Entin Investigates. I will tag him in the description box below. But he did a very new interview with Kaylee Gonsalvez's sister, Alivea Gonsalvez. I don't know her married name, so I'm just going to call her Alivea Gonsalvez. And she looks absolutely unrecognizable. She's lost a ton of weight. She's had her teeth done. I wouldn't recognize her if she passed me walking down the street. But nonetheless, Brian Entin does a brand new interview with her and asked her all sorts of questions. So I just want to talk about this interview. He starts asking her questions about the victim impact statement, and Alivea says that she basically feels that she didn't have any other way to show up for Kaylee because there wasn't a trial, and she had planned on a trial, and it was going to be hard for her household to attend a trial anyways, but she really, really wished they would have had a trial, and she would show up that way for Kaylee. But because that's not happening, she feels like giving a victim impact statement is basically her way of showing up for Kaylee and Maddie both. She says that she'll never get to go to their weddings or go to a baby shower. So this is her way in her mind to show up for both Kaylee and Maddie by giving a victim impact statement and making it count. She goes on to talk about how she has good days and bad days, and the day she did this interview was particularly a good day for her. And again, she goes on to say that going to a trial would have been very difficult for her immediate family. She has 4 kids, and taking time off, 3 months worth of trial days would have been very difficult for her. And she goes back and forth with not having the information regarding the case. They still, as a victim's family, don't have a clue what happened in this case, and they still want answers, just like the rest of us do. I would think the victim's family at this point would know what happened, but it sounds like the prosecution is making them wait till after the sentencing hearing to even give them even an iota of extra information. And I honestly think that's because they don't have any more information. The evidence that we were told at the plea hearing is the evidence that they have, nothing more, nothing less. Brian Entin asks Alivea what the plea hearing was like for her and her family, and she says,
"It was honestly pretty annoying, and that's just honestly my first reaction there. We didn't have any sort of communication with the prosecutors, like, park here, we'll meet you, nothing like that. So we had to park across the street at Winco, just because we figured we'd be able to get a spot there. And as, you're walking out, people start to, recognize probably who my dad is, maybe who my mom is. And it just felt like we were walking up already feeling kind of vulnerable, and then it just started closing in, right? And you're kind of just asking for space, and you need to back up and this and that, and it's really not given. Actually, on the way in across the street, because we were across the street at Winco, there were 3 officers standing outside of a cruiser, and I was like, hey, is there any way that you can kind of help us just like get across the street and into the courthouse? And they were super kind, and of course, they helped us in that way. I think the hardest part was my dad and brother waited outside of the courthouse, and that's hard not to walk in united, but then also to respect that this whole process has, yes, we're united as a family, or, even all of the families, I'd say, but it is very much an individual path. I can't put my mom and my dad on my back and make them walk my path, and vice versa. So it was hard not to walk in with, my dad, who is, just our protector, and, our shield. So it was me, my mom, my aunt, my sister Autumn, and then actually a member of the Kernodle family, but we were all females. So it already just felt kind of vulnerable. And then the worst part was just waiting. So we walked in, they didn't know that we were coming. They didn't know who we were. And so we're just sitting there waiting, waiting, waiting. Eventually, we get taken to a little waiting room and then moved into an empty courtroom. And we're just waiting, waiting, waiting. And the police officers are there and they're kind of talking on their walkie-talkies back and forth a little bit. And I think that anxiety crept in for my mom especially. And it just felt like I just want to rip this Band-Aid off. Getting into the courtroom was also shitty. Everyone had been seated before us other than members of like the public and some members of the media. But all the families were there, prosecutors, everyone on the defense's side except for the defendant. And it literally, I'm probably exaggerating, but it felt like everyone turned and looked at us when we were walking in. We were in they're kind of pew setups. So I think that we were in that fourth row on the way back. And on the other side of us was members of the public. So once again, just like a very vulnerable feeling of, feeling misplaced, I guess. And then, once proceedings started, the judge kind of started in a funky way. I'll leave it at that for now. And that was annoying. And then
when he kind of like disciplined everyone about about people calling.
And again, I know it's neither here nor there. I just can't get over the fact of how different she looks from previous interviews. Brian Entin asked about the plea hearing, and it sounds like her and her family basically expected for everyone at the courthouse to bend for their family. And because it didn't happen that way, they were annoyed by everything at the plea hearing. She also says that she thinks the judge was disrespectful in a sense by starting it off by lecturing Steve G when he was talking about call the judge, give him a piece of your mind, tell him your opinion regarding the trial and the plea hearing. And she also felt that the judge was more respectful to Brian Koberger than to anybody else in the courtroom. And to that I say, he's the defendant. I mean, he has to speak to him. He didn't say anything other than you don't have to stand for me, which is a lot of times what happens when a defendant stands, and they don't necessarily have to. A judge will say, you don't have to stand for me. I appreciate it, but you don't. He didn't say anything more than that. So I'm not sure how she felt that way, but I'm also not in her shoes. So I guess I can't speak on feelings or emotions towards any of that because I didn't see it that way, but I'm not in her shoes. Alivea goes on to say that by the time they received the email regarding the plea hearing and had time to respond to it, the plea hearing had already been provided by the prosecution to the defense, and the defense had already answered and signed the paperwork to go ahead with the agreement of this plea hearing. So Alivea wanted to be able to add something to the plea. We want a full confession. We want to know where the weapon is. And the prosecution came back to Alivea and basically said, too late, too bad, so sorry, can't do it. Alivea says, can we just make one amendment to have a full confession? And the prosecution says, no, too bad. And they weren't happy about that. And honestly, I don't think I would be either, because it sounds a little bit like they're not so sure about the evidence anymore either. I think they expected more evidence, and since it's not there, they want a confession. I think they want to make sure that he is the one who did it and that he didn't have an accomplice either, because it's very hard to believe that Brian Koberger did this and did it alone. And specifically, the prosecution said it wouldn't be ethical to ask for that. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but that was the answer given. I'm also wondering if the prosecution is saying, no, that's not ethical, because they know that Brian Koberger cannot give a full confession because he didn't do it. And that could be a big reason why the prosecution is saying, no, that's not ethical. They said no without hesitation and without consulting anybody at all. It was an immediate no. And that could be because they know Brian Koberger is the patsy. Olivia goes on to say that she believes Maddie was actually possibly the target, that she believes Brian Koberger may have seen her out somewhere and followed her home, and she was ultimately the target because he went upstairs first. She says Brian Koberger went in the back sliding door and straight up the stairs to Maddie's room. And that's why she believes that Maddie may have been the target.
Anything you know that we don't know about whether he, who the target was, or whether he had a connection to someone in the house, or why that house had.
I think that this connection theory started when they announced that this was a targeted incident, right? Because people, and they use this targeted incident as a way to say that the community was safe, right? I think that that was definitely the wrong word choice. And I think that if I go back now and watch those press conferences with Sheriff Fry, you can see that, right? Where he says, we can't say that the community isn't at threat. But by then, the targeted had stuck so much for whatever reason. I think what they meant to say was something along the lines of, we believe these victims have passed some time ago, and there hasn't been any further attacks on the community. And the roommates inside the house were home during this attack, and they also were not attacked. So we think that the community is safe because of the time lapse that has happened here. But I think maybe an easy way to say that is targeted. Maybe isolated would have been a little better, but I don't know if isolated was charged enough to kind of stick the way targeted did. So that being said.
And it was confusing. Remember, like they said targeted, but then the prosecutor said, then they said not targeted, then the prosecutor said targeted. It was like the story was.
It was someone in the house. Then it was the house itself.
Yeah.
Then it was the street sign and maybe the dog. Sorry, Murphy. Don't mean to bring you up. But I genuinely don't think that they meant to get themselves into this targeted hole the way that kind of this targeted snowballed itself. But I think that frustration came from us with, it's like you're saying it's targeted and you literally say in a press conference, you're just going to have to trust us. And then at the end, it's all found out that, well, he didn't have a connection to anyone. So we're obviously sitting there thinking, well, then how the hell is it targeted? I don't know a why. I think that even if he was hooked up to a lie detector and given truth serum, his, why would be that he was just desperately trying to feel anything at all because he's a psychopath and he doesn't feel human emotions the way we do. I don't think it's a reason that would make sense to any of us because we aren't that. I think that reasoning would only make sense to that type of, human being or whatever you want to call him. But as far as the connection goes, I do truly believe in my heart that he at some point had spotted probably, I don't like to say Maddie because I think that naming someone implies a certain level of like victim blaming or guilt, and I don't feel that way at all. So that's why I have always hesitated from saying anyone at all. But if I just look at it from like a factual basis of being like, he went directly upstairs, Kaylee wasn't, in that house as much towards that tail end there. But again, they're all assumptions.
Brian Entin asks Olivia if Olivia would like to see Brian Koberger do like a tell-all interview, and she says, although contradictory, no, she wouldn't, which is very contradictory. She wants to hear basically the evidence that the prosecution has prior to the plea sentencing. She wants to hear the evidence that they have from the prosecution. She does want to have a full picture of what happened. She does want that from Brian Koberger, but she doesn't want him to do it in an interview where he's got the control. A big part of this family is they focus on control. Who has it? Who wants it? Who's going to get it? Who's got it now? They want to be in control of everything, and they want everybody to stick to a narrative. And she says that repeatedly in this interview and in others.
I understand how that sounds contradictory, but let me explain. I think that it should have been I think that it should have been done within the bounds of the legal system where he didn't have control over it, where he doesn't get to, control this narrative, where it's done in a sterile environment, and in a way that is, read or perceived as a court document. It's not about him. It's not about his name. It's not about his face. It's not about his voice. It's literally a means to an end, right? It's, this individual has this information, whatever, X, Y, Z, if you just think about it like kind of in a calculated manner. So no, I hope that after sentencing, no one ever says his name again.
She says after the sentencing, she'd like the whole world to stop even mentioning Bryan Kohberger's name and to focus on the victims. If they're going to talk about anything, talk about the victims. Unfortunately, we don't know the victims. We can just say what we've been told, which isn't much. And the reason most people talk about Bryan Kohberger is because the prosecution did zero justice in informing the world of any factual basis that Bryan Kohberger did this and did this alone. And that's why people continue to talk about it. Although I'm sure from her shoes, it looks different. Brian Entin speaks on how this became a nationally known case, and he says, and Alivea agrees, that it's because all four victims, Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, and Xana, are very relatable people. She goes on to say that they're not stuck up, they're nice, they're kind, they're funny, they're attractive, they're everything you would want in a brother, sister, daughter, aunt, uncle, and that they're just relatable. And to that I say, yeah, possibly that could absolutely be a reason that this case went nationally so fast. But it's also because it's so hard to believe that with the evidence that we've been given, it's very hard to believe that Bryan Kohberger did this and did this alone, like I continue to say. The prosecution doesn't have very much evidence against him, and I think people are gravitating towards this case, especially now, because it's still, to this day, nothing has been proven, and the evidence they have still doesn't prove what they think it does to the general public. To anybody looking into this case, there's been so many inconsistencies, timelines that they can't even settle on, and you expect the general public to just be like, oh, yeah, okay, we believe you. And it's not going to happen that way when you have people that can think outside the box. Brian Entin asked Alivea's feelings on the book and the docuseries that have been released and coming out on this case. And she says something that I find strange. I don't think she meant it in any other way than what she said it in, but I just thought it was a strange word to use.
Each one is different. I know that Vicky Ward, who co-wrote the James Patterson book, she, reached out to us, and, we earlier were kind of offered to be a larger part of that book, and we declined for, whatever reasoning. I honestly couldn't tell you exactly why. But later in that writing process, she reached out to us. And so my dad and I, kind of talked to her, not in a formal manner or anything, just kind of in a voice for Kaylee to give it a little bit more like lividity or, vibrancy.
So yeah, she says the word lividity in like giving Kaylee a voice and keeping her alive in a sense. I just find that that's a very strange and odd word to use, considering the word lividity can also mean the way your blood pools after a person is deceased and how it pulls like gravity does, and it's going to pool closest to the floor. I just found that that was an odd word to use. And although Steve G said that they were not going to attend the sentencing, you bet your bottom dollar they will be, and they will be giving a victim impact statement. Now, something I found extremely interesting that goes along with how we all think to begin with, Brian Entin specifically asks as if Alivea stays in touch with the roommates, and she goes on to say, no. Matter of fact, on November 13th, she reached out to one of the roommates or both on Instagram and said, this was prior to knowing that Kaylee or Maddie or anybody had passed away. She said to the roommates, hey, I'm sure Kaylee's phone is just dead. She's not responding to me. Can you just have her call me? And the roommates to this day have never said a peep, never responded, never said boo, never said I'm sorry, never said anything to Alivea or anyone in the Gonsalves family. That is wild. You would think the roommates would at least reach out or at the very least respond to that message and just say, I'm sorry. If there's anything you would like to know, please call me. I'll tell you everything I know since I was there that night, supposedly. Wild that the roommates have not even responded to the victims' families, the so-called friends, their families have not even been in touch with you is wild.
In terms of the like Dylan and the surviving roommates, do you stay in touch with them at all, or?
No, so I've actually only reached out to them one time in my whole life, and it was because I knew that they were roommates. So it was literally on November 13th as everything was unfolding, and I messaged them on Instagram and I said, hey, we can't get a hold of Kaylee. Like, I'm sure her phone is just dead. Can you have her call us? Neither of those messages were replied to. I've never reached out again. They've never reached out to me as far as I know.
And then she goes on to end it by saying that she doesn't think her or members of her family have grieved yet, and that after sentencing, that's a process that they'll have to go through and work through, because she has been focused on the case from day one in getting information and everything she could, that she never allowed herself time to grieve, and that will be the process she imagines after sentencing. And that's what we have for you today. It is beautiful. Well, at least here, it is beautiful out today. So do something nice for yourself. Be kind, but more importantly, be kind to your dog. Bye, guys.